You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur. Hey everybody, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz, in which I conduct in-depth and revealing interviews of icons and who I feel are the next generation icons of the weddings and event industry. All of this is to bring you education and inspiration, and I am in a great mood today. You know, it is day by day, isn't it? Well, today I'm in a good mood because I've actually produced entertainment. This is wild. For 4 big outdoor resort jobs in the past month and a half between my bands, Sound Connection, Rhythm 6, and an all-star type of group. And it was just so good to be able to have them, you know, to be able to play music again, to make art, and for the crowd outside. I mean, everyone was careful and socially distanced and all of that. But just to see people, you know, being moved and having a good time again and just, you know, temporarily forgetting all this craziness that we're going through. Anyway, you know, in terms, though, of the stress that we are going through, I put together a list of top 10 tips for dealing with stress that I've pretty much taken from all the interviews I've done with these icons of the weddings and event business, and it's really cool. So to get a copy of these top 10 tips for dealing with stress, go to theweddingbiz.com/top tips. Again, that's theweddingbiz.com/top tips. So before I introduce today's guest, I want to mention last week's was really cool. Look, every one of these I love. I mean, every single person I really connect with, and I love the interviews. But this one allowed us to go deeper. And this was with Matt Porteous. He is an award-winning photographer who has also gained a world-class reputation for his just incredible documentary style photography. And he's also considered the royal photographer for his work with the Cambridges. So that was last week. If you missed it, again, it was really, really special. And so was The Next Level About It with Jennifer Stein, editor of I Do Magazine. So be sure to go back and listen to last week's. And today I am also very excited because this is someone very special, talented, professional out of Sydney, Australia. And it is Philip Carr of Philip Carr and Associates. And I love how he calls himself an event architect and stylist. I love that phrase, and we really get into it in this interview. Philip just completely transforms ordinary spaces into multi-layers, theatrical environments, and basically turns his clients' fantasies into just amazing, breathtaking realities. Philip also has a different way of talking about how he designs events, which you're about to hear. And he also talks about the events he produced for Nelson Mandela. He did several, including some when President Clinton came by to visit, as well as President Bush. And Philip also takes us through his process with clients, which is really fascinating. And just the amount of detailed thinking that he applies to his clients' events is really breathtaking. You're going to have a good time listening to this. So enjoy my conversation with Philip Carr. Hey, Philip, we got on. This worked. We had a little trouble when we first started with the technology to get on this interview, but here we are.
It's taken 14 hours to get here.
Thank God for the time difference because I'm just outside of Washington, D.C. You're in Sydney, so this is great. So, you know, where I'd like to start is, first of all, I understand that you were born and raised in South Africa. What part of South Africa?
I was born in Johannesburg.
What did your parents do?
My father was a doctor and my mother was a teacher.
Oh, that's interesting because I thought I read somewhere that you helped your mother when you were really young with catering and setting up events. She also ran events?
Yes. No, events in those days was catering. You know, it wasn't the layers of detail and events as it is today. But we used to always have great, like, sort of Sundays barbecues at our house when my father was alive. And then when, after our father died, one of my mom's friends said, why don't you help us do an event? And I sort of went there and helped. I was actually in the army then because we had to go to the army. And I sort of went there and was straightening tables and, you know, doing my normal detailed stuff. And the catering actually evolved into events.
How old were you when you were doing this?
I was about 19, I started.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So you were you in school at the time?
Yeah, so at 19, I'd left school, and I was in the army, and then we had to do 2 years in the army, and then after the army, I went to university, and I actually studied as an industrial psychologist, and but the events was always sort of something in the background that wasn't what we didn't start a business. It was just sort of by word of mouth and people saying, you got to help me do this or do this event, and the next minute we had a business.
But can I back up for a minute, Philip, if you don't mind? When you said industrial psychology, I don't know if I'm really aware of what the word industrial with psychology means. Is it more organizational,
Yeah,
like in the work?
maybe today it's called organizational psychology. So it's psychology in the work, work motivation, dealing with trade unions, and all things it's in the business environment.
It sounds like you went in a completely different direction then.
Yeah, well, I always thought the psychology base was really good for dealing with the clients since then. Having a bit of psychology, because even when you do industrial, you still have to do some normal psychology as well. But I think a little bit of understanding of people I think helps.
And I read also that you had an interest in architecture at the time. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was interesting because at the time of there were the 1976 riots, and we were leaving school, and I wanted to be an architect, and my parents sort of said, no one's going to build. The country's falling apart, and you need to do something else. And who's going to build? Little did we know that the whole structure of housing would change in the country, where people would go for more high security housing and estates and everything. But I always think events is a form of art installation, and whether when you're designing a room, it's really the same as designing a house. And when you doing when you're doing an event installation, it's the same as an art installation. I think as long as you've got a creative outlet, I think it can come in many forms.
It's interesting because on your website, I saw you call yourself, as opposed to what a lot of people will say, event planner, event designer, you call yourself an event architect and stylist. And that so grabbed my attention. But rather than going with my assumptions, what do you mean by event architect and stylist?
Well, I think architecture is, it's the building and putting all the parts together. And, there's a lot of times when people sort of, look at event people and they say, are you the party decorator, or are you the caterer? And bearing in mind, I've been around for like 40 years now in events, is the thing changed a lot with people's naivety of what an event was. And I thought it's really about like architecture. It's like building a space with sound and lighting and valet parking and catering. And I saw it more as a building, like you build an event. You don't just you don't decorate an event. That's quite sort of diluting what it actually is to create an event.
Yeah, it's interesting. The word choice, it gives me a different impression, a different feel, in my mind when you describe it that way. You also talk about creating not only these transforming ordinary spaces into multi-layers, but you also talk about theatrical environments, and I know that those of us in events, do feel there's theater. How do you look at it? How do you describe that?
Well, I think you're always trying to transform a space, or you're trying to transform people's experience. So I always think it's from the time they arrive at a function to leave, and arriving is even where they park their car. Is there valet parking? It's the whole experience almost from the time they leave the house. In fact, it's probably part of the experience of getting dressed. And, I think the more ritualized you go before a party, so if you're a woman and you having your makeup done by someone or your hair done and you're getting dressed, it all becomes part of the event experience rather than sort of just rushing from work in your sweaty suit. So I think it's like taking things as far back as you can to the event. And in fact, we often, when people leave the event, we always give them the morning papers, or, there's something sort of at their car, if they get to their car, there's a little packet of jelly beans, even if there's no valet parking, and it's sort of stuck on the windscreen. it's taking something further. Or when you give people croissants and jam when they leave the function, it's always trying to extend what's really often just a 5-hour event into something like that goes further with and greater memories.
Geez, I love when you were talking about your example was women getting dressed and getting made up to go to the event, how the experience starts then. I got chills. Like I all of a sudden I'm getting all these brainstorms. I remember when I was young and I would, just go out. I would go out to the clubs with friends and things like that. I remember putting on music when I was, starting to get ready. And
wasn't that from Saturday Night Fever? That John Travolta image where the music,
right.
where you started putting the music on before you put on
right.
your white suit.
Yeah, but I mean, you're right. You're absolutely starting to create the environment for yourself at that point. It starts even before you arrive at the venue. I love that. I almost think that people could send out, I don't know, some kind of gifts or something to people, especially the people staying in the hotel, like maybe even a playlist of music to put on while they're getting ready,
Even if it's some level, you're collecting people on a destination thing and taking them to the ceremony, and it's the music you play in the car, in the bus, or if they're mints in the bus. I think the more layers of detail, and I suppose it goes all the way to the invitation. Today there's such a big thing to try and do paperless post. And I still think, I often talk to Cece, how when you get like a great invitation, that's there's something, because you're touching it, you're seeing it, you maybe you're smelling it, but it starts working on your senses, where often when you look at paperless post, it's less dimensional. So, so there's definitely something about almost the old-fashioned way of doing something that extends the experience.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about it. I agree. When I get something, it's so rare that I get anything in the mail anymore. But when I get a card, out of the blue, or like you say, a special invitation, a save the date, it really is special, and you're right. That really sets it off. And Cece was on the show, by the way, a couple times, and we talked a great deal about that. So, first of all, you do a mix of events, of course. I'm sure, like everyone else, right? Weddings and corporate events and fundraisers, and I know that it was really interesting. I read that one of the big weddings you did was a very high society Indian wedding for 2,500 guests over a period of 5 days. Can you tell me something about that? That just sounds just fantastic.
Well, it was kind of an overwhelming, daunting thing. But what you realize is when you work with an Indian family, they all event people with, you the event person, but they also the event people. And the uncles are involved, and I remember having meetings and there's 18 people there. It's the father and the brothers and the grandfather, but everyone sort of like helps. You guiding the whole thing, but they very involved. And in fact, what we did is we divided the main party into 4 events of 600. So there were like 4 kitchens running, getting food to 600 people, rather than 1 kitchen giving food to 2,500 people. And it was really interesting, all the different, all the different days and the Mendi. And we actually did their engagement party, which they had 800 people. And I said, who has 800 people?
My God.
And they said to me, oh, no, it's only immediate family we've invited. A lot of people are really pissed off that they weren't invited, but we only did the immediate family. And so you realize the scale, how they see the scale is so different to what most other cultures would see it as, And it was actually this amazingly beautiful thing, because I learned that, there's so many different levels of sari. So there's ones that are green that almost have got emerald in them, or a ruby in them if they were red. The colors are so intense, and the quality of the silk and everything. So it was this most incredibly beautiful function to see all these colors almost on like not high alert, but, sort of just so magnified in terms of intensity.
Can you tell us something about the engagement party? You've really piqued my interest here. 800 people for an engagement party. Can you tell me something about the decor?
Well, it was interesting because I remember it was about 20 years ago, but it was interesting because the engagement party is where the 2 families give gifts to the bride and the groom. And a lot of the gifts are, they make sort of ships or boats or flowers all out of money, folded money so you get presented like a sailing ship, which is actually like $3,000. But then there were these two tables, and they were quite wealthy families. And I'd never seen a table in those days where, there were Cartier watches and, Bulgari this and Hermes that. And the tables they put on show. So obviously a lot of these cultures, like shame counts for a lot. So it's quite over the top seeing these tables of gifts. And even when we did a few days before the wedding, you go to the bride's house, and there's literally a room of all the clothes and everything that the parents have bought her for her married life. And, it was the days when Versace was really big, and, I'd never seen it was literally like going into like Harrods.
Oh, wow.
With the amount of stuff that was there. So it was interesting, the different culture,
Yeah. You also did numerous functions for President Nelson Mandela at his presidential home. How did that come to be?
Well, a PR company asked me to do a function, start doing, would I help out with the event? And I think, in fact, the first event was actually his 79th birthday party. And obviously it was the most incredible experience, to go to his house. Well, it was at the presidential house. He never actually slept there because it was part of the old government. He actually slept in another house. But, we were setting up the function, and I decided that I was going to have like a sushi bar, and he had just come out of prison a couple of years before, and he'd never know what sushi was. And I tried to think of all the things that he would never have seen in the 27 years that he was in prison. And I did other functions for him, like for a couple of years. And then I moved to Australia, and he was coming to Australia, and a PR company heard that I knew what he liked. He loved grilled fish, and gooseberries was his favorite fruit, and all these things. So I got employed here to set up the functions. And through that and the PR company, I got onto, then Clinton came out, and we did about 6 functions for him. And then George Bush came, and Giuliani. So basically it was connections through a PR company that I started doing all the presidents and when they came to the country.
Mm. So you mentioned when you moved to Australia. Why did you move to Australia?
I was uncomfortable with what was going on in the country. I mean, often you're finishing events at 2-3 o'clock in the morning and driving home, and at that point it was recommended that you didn't even stop at traffic lights. So you'd sort of slow down to a traffic light, because people would smash your window, take your phone, or hijack you or something. So it was pretty nerve-wracking driving home, and it always used to only affect me at that time of the 3 o'clock in the morning, even though lots of things happened at other times. And then I just decided, I was about 38 then, and I thought that was really old. And the quicker I got to another country and set up, the better it would be than arriving later in a country.
But then you had to start all over, didn't you, in terms of building a client base?
Yeah, but I think I was very naive, and I think a lot of people that have to emigrate are kind of naive. So I thought, I'm coming to a country that also speaks English, and, everything will just carry on as normal. So many people that were coming to Australia knew me. So you just assume everything's just going to carry on as normal. And, I've worked for a lot of the right people, and, out of the 20 wealthiest people in South Africa, 16 of them were my clients. So I think, well, this is just going to carry on. I'm going to arrive, and, the first week, everything will be back to normal. And obviously it takes many years of just being in a new place that's totally unknown. The way people speak English or the way people talk in Australia is very different to South African, so then interesting, I had this portfolio, and I'd done some really expensive functions by those days and those standards. And, I took out, in those days, my portfolio was literally like a laminated pictures. And I took out my fanciest function, and people just looked at me and said, "Oh, this is like really over the top and ugly." Oh. And they almost unanimously chose this one wedding that had sort of blue and white check cloths and sunflowers in the center. So very sort of maybe Californian, casual, like sort of Napa Valley. And what you realize is what is smart or what's good in one country is not necessarily relatable in another country, and people sort of at different times, people perceive things as good taste or bad taste or in very different ways in different countries.
Coming back to events and weddings, can you take me through your general process from when you first meet a client, and how you handle those early meetings, through to an event?
Most of the people that come and see me, the time they come and see me, they've committed to using me. They know who's in the market and they feel that I'm the right person for them. It's not, I don't do a lot of quoting and not getting events. What normally happens, especially if we take weddings, is most times the bride, they're at work and they want their meeting at 6:30 at night. So I like to bring them to my house and sort of, set up the table, looking quite casual, but it's chocolates that I picked up in London, or it's things that they possibly are not aware of, because I have to show like a point of difference. And how do everyone can say I'm different or I'm original or I'm creative, but how do you do it without, there have to be like little things like what I put on the table, the way I serve things. I think people coming to my house, I've got I've collected things over 40 years and I've got some great pieces of art. And often seeing them in my environment is what will make them feel like they're gelling with me or they're not gelling with me. And in fact, it's funny, in the last 3 weeks, I've had 3 clients here and all of the grooms have offered to buy my place. They think it's amazing. So I don't know if it would be a good thing at the bottom line. But I think because a wedding is, and a lot of the events are so personal, it's quite nice for them to come into my space with different people. If it's a birthday party that's going to be in their house, I like to, I tend to go to them, and because you want to see their house, often from the time you walk through the gates to the front door, you kind of look at the house, the kind of people they are, you can see their style, and you can sell them. You can sell them what's for them, and you kind of know them more often than they know themselves. Whereas whether it's a wedding, it's almost, my home is like a neutral space, because you're saying what kind of wedding, their house may not be a reflection of the style of wedding or the type of wedding that they want. And they sort of come to the meeting. Often there's a little bit of a fuss about, where did you get these chocolates from? Or like today I had a meeting and I served this Dauphinoise cheese with sour cherries and star anise on top. And it's definitely an interest if they feel that they think I'm the right person for them. And then it reinforces it by, not having sort of no-name brand cheddar on the table. And so sort of being a little bit, not necessarily snobby, but just introducing them to stuff that they feel that they've come to the right place.
That is so interesting to me. I think that's wonderful. Do you want to hear behind-the-scenes stories of some of the most influential music industry pros around? Check out my other podcast, The Music Makers. You can find the show on your cell phone's podcast app or at themusicmakers.com. Again, that's The Music Makers. In terms of how you decide, again, you talk about, being a stylist and event architect. How do you start to get your ideas, your inspiration for a particular client's wedding? Are you able to kind of talk about how you work with them in order to get those ideas?
At the moment, I'm going through a phase where I'm more talking about the experience. So like, what experience do we want to have? What do we want our guests to feel? What do we want? How are they going to feel when they arrive? How do they feel when outside the church I've got cappuccino carts? Because I know that most people will walk out of a ceremony and the first thing they're thinking of is to get a coffee. And so what happens if the coffee's standing right outside the church, or if it's a very hot time in Australia? I've had ice cream carts outside, and what more could you want than have some lemon sorbet when you come out of church?
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So you're always trying to be one step ahead of, like, I suppose I always thought I'm quite a hedonist. So what would I like? Oh, if I came out of a ceremony and there was, lemon sorbet on a homemade cone, I
Brilliant.
would love it. So
Yeah.
let's give it to the friend. And it's interesting because often people have arrived at the event and they've said to me, "Oh my God, the best thing was all I wanted was a coffee and it was there for me. Or all I
Yeah.
wanted was an ice cream and it was there for me." And that's all part of the process. So I try to show them, let's think about working through the function. Doesn't really matter what color the flowers are at this point. It's more about what experience we want. What do we want them to eat, drink, feel? How we lay out the room is, I know I'm really good at that. Thinking, well, like I don't really believe in I do main tables in the middle of the room. So the most amount of people are near the main table. So it's often like a central table. Rather than something that's raised on the one side of the room with the bridal party on it, and you often don't. It often creates a wall between the bride and the guest. So just thinking how each of these things would go. After when the guests arrive, if you give them wet, and there's like a sort of, there's Greek dancing or horrors or something, and they finish and there's trays of chilled towels with ice on it. I mean, what more could you want than, you're a bit sweaty and you've got to go back to your seat and you can cool yourself down with a towel or, so I think it's always trying to think one step ahead. And so how I try to talk to the clients is like, how are we going to be one step ahead all the time? What would people like when they arrive? And there's so many things that happen at events. You sort of arrive and the staff are sort of standing at the door with the drinks, and then everyone ends up like just clogging up the entrance. So so I always like put the waiters on the dance floor and the parents. So the guests walk in and they walk towards the parents and the guests, and we keep on bringing the waiters and the parents closer to the entrance door as the room fills in, rather than And I think it's just, I suppose, after all these years, it's looking at those kind of strange things, but I've become like sort of obsessive about it. I'm obsessed that the toilets have the best candles and the best creams, because most women, their first exposure to an event is going to the bathroom and checking that they're fine. So if you go to the bathroom and there's, really bad pumps, sort of supermarket pump soap there, that's your first impression of the function. So if you sell luxury from the beginning, everyone wants to feel luxury for whatever that word has now ended up meaning, but they want to feel spoiled, so they want to feel indulged and special, but I think in a more clever way. So putting $100,000 worth of flowers, climbing up the walls and doing things, there's nothing necessary for the function. Like in the old days, it was always about having that room reveal where everyone, the doors opened and everyone like oohed and awed. I don't think anyone even had phones and cameras then, but it was about that. That was the surprise. Now I quite like that guests can just walk in, the band is playing, and the event has started. So you get like sucked into the event. So when you're coming up the escalator or the elevator and the doors open, you kind of hear the music and you're drawn into the space. And what is the point of sort of standing for 45 minutes outside while the bride's having photos, and you're standing in high heel shoes, you're holding your handbag, they're trying to pass canapes around, you're holding a drink. So often when you think about that, I think, when the guests can walk in, put their handbag down, and where they're sitting, and then go to the dance floor and serve drinks, I think they prefer that. They prefer that. And I think all those things, women, I don't think sort of check how comfortable the shoes are before they arrive at an event, and often standing for 45 minutes in $2,000 uncomfortable shoes is not pleasant. So I think it's trying to think of things on all levels and all layers, like what will the guests really enjoy. And I suppose that's where, when we look at, when we passed, I don't know what you call them in America, like toasted cheeses or cheese toasties, or you do like a little cheeseburger at 11 o'clock. Everyone likes that more, because often that's hitting more what they wanted but because it's a wedding, you think, oh, I better do something, I better serve good salmon, or I must do this. But in fact, if people went to a wedding and they got great gourmet burgers, they must probably be ecstatic.
Wow, I love. I am so engaged here in your. You're telling me a story. I love the little details and how that does really define ultimate and luxury is thinking of the little details like that. What about obviously we all know in the industry, every single event there is going to be something that goes wrong. Every event. How do you view dealing with these unforeseen challenges, and what is your perspective on that aspect of it?
Well, with the actual event, I always say to my clients, it's only them and myself that have the running order. So if, for example, on a little level, it's running 15 minutes late, or it's running 8 minutes early or something, only we know that, so there's a lot that the guests don't know. If you're talking about things that can go wrong, like sort of the ovens, something happens to the ovens and that, fortunately, it's never really happened to me badly. Do you know what I mean? It's always something that you can overcome. I mean, I was doing an event and someone pressed a button and the blinds at the Museum of Contemporary Art, and the blinds started going down, and in all the windowsills were these massive flower arrangements, and the blinds are coming down anyway. It's amazing how in 1 minute, in 20 seconds, you manage to get them in reverse. But I think it's more how you feel afterwards, thinking what could have happened than when something bad happens. And I think the other side is, one of my only really bad experiences was a client that wanted her friend to do the invitation. And and so, well, we don't normally do that. Normally we do everything. No, she insists. It's not negotiable. And anyway, the time the friend did the invitation and things were going backwards and forwards, and I was telling them, to create lines to bleed it, everyone looks at the invitation and it's all approved and this is the one I want. But we don't realize that the 16th of April is actually a Wednesday, not a Saturday. And the date is wrong. And they also were in control of the guest list. The father had this massive company and the secretary is doing it. And the girl was a Hindu. So she was Jewish, but she also believed in Hindu. So she was going to have a Hindu ceremony and a Jewish ceremony. And so we had the guest list. The invitations went out. So, person number one is bride and groom. They invited to the Hindu function and the Jewish function. Person number two, what happens in all this chaos? The secretary takes off the bride and groom off the top. So everyone moves up one. So now the auntie that was never supposed to see the Hindu function is now being invited to it. Oh. So there was the drama of that, and then the invitation being printed on the wrong date. But the good thing with that is I learned it only happened once. Do you know what I mean? It will never happen again.
Right.
I will never let anyone, I'd rather be responsible. I make them sign off, you make them sign off on the invitation and do stuff because they know how their names are spelt. And it's so easy when you look at things over and over to make a mistake. So you make them, like with the invitation, they're a bit responsible for the thing. But thank God, nothing's really bad ever happened to me at an event, like sort of with the weight. But besides once, we did the surprise wedding, and it was so we did the engagement party, and then the bride disappeared to put on a wedding dress. The band was in band clothes, and eventually the band arrives back, and they're all in white tuxedos, look a little bit daggy, and say, guess what? You're not at a wedding. You're not at an engagement party, you're at a wedding, and we had the wedding ceremony. Mm-hmm. There was a point where we decided, and it was very Italian themed. So I rented a Vespa, and I thought the Vespa's going to come through the room, the marquee, with a wedding cake on it. Oh. And so anyway, when I go and borrow this Vespa from the motorcycle place, they said, can anything go wrong? I said, nothing could go wrong with this Vespa. Yeah. Anyway, so eventually we say, guess what? The cake has just been finished. It's made, and there's a reveal. The curtain's open, and the one waiter drives through in the Vespa, and as he hits the dance floor, the motorbike just goes into a spin.
Oh, no.
But the funny thing is that the girl behind, the other waitress, was holding this massive wedding cake. She managed to fly off the motorbike and hold the cake.
Oh, my God.
So the motorbike was spinning and she was just standing there with a cake, and it almost looked like the show. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
So I think that was one of the worst or funny, what could go wrong.
Oh,
But I think, today, I think, things are so different to when I think 40 years ago, where you didn't even know that tablecloths could go to the floor, or, the bar was this thing stuck in the corner where people went and got their own drinks, and things were so different then. You didn't think of the process. And now I think of, well, people are going to dance. They're going to get back to their table. We're going to have speeches. We need every water glass filled, because even if they don't get a drink, there's at least something for them to drink. So, because what happens is people go back to the table. 3 ladies say, we'll each have a Diet Coke. The waiter goes and gets the Diet Coke. The time the other 7 people come to the table, they want a Diet Coke, and the MC saying it's speech time, no drink, and there's no drinks. So I think it's thinking about all those things, like what would happen, if, so see that there's water on the table, or see that the glass is always filled. Also important that the water is only poured when the guests are about to sit down. A lot of caterers and things, they love pre-pouring the water, and the time the guests get there, there's like a film of dust on the water glass. And how each of those things will make such a different experience for the guest.
Mm. Also, obviously, you run a very successful business, and there is the business aspect to a creative business. How do you feel about the business part of it?
Well, I think it's more about the business. So, because often people will say to me, "Oh, you're just a creative person." You're clearly not. To be that you have to be that organized. I mean, people use you because you're organized and you get the job done, not because the room looks nice with pretty flowers. So I think they need the safety and security that you actually know how to run the business and see that everything gets done, and you get deposits, and that people get paid and people arrive, is actually much more important than styling the function. It's no good designing a function and the florist doesn't arrive to do it. So it's much more important that you're like super organized. And I think it's like trying to be super organized in your life. The interesting thing at the moment, like with all this COVID, I changed my whole Instagram thing. I thought people are not really interested to see, like $100,000 worth of flowers falling off a ceiling. And I started doing just things related to COVID. And the one day I said, it's time to tidy up your house. And I took photos of my dressing room and I made a little video and about, it's tidy up time. And I showed like 10 of my drawers. And from that, I've now just designed 3 people's dressing rooms.
Oh, come on. Wow.
But in theory, it's actually all the same thing. The way my dressing room is set up, or the way, there's special drawers for glasses or whatever it is that's how the business works.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's no different. So when you say I wanted to do architecture, it's all different versions of the same thing. Whether you're designing a house or you're designing a function, if the seats, I do a lot of things like we put a broom. Sorry, I'm a bit mad for tangents sometimes, but I put the broom down next to the table and we push the chair in. So every chair in the room is exactly the same distance from the table. And a lot of guests maybe wouldn't know that. They don't walk in and say, "Oh, isn't it amazing? The chairs are all exactly in the same place." But I do believe there's a certain inner peace that you see when you walk into a room and the cutlery is exactly the same distance. I've got a way of putting that every fork is exactly the same distance away from each other, or the chair is exactly the right distance. I don't think people realize, but that does create the harmony of the room.
Wow, your focus, Philip, on detail on all respects, from the creative side to the business side, is just, it's really refreshing to hear about. You mentioned COVID. So, at the time of this recording, July 1st, we are in the middle of the pandemic. Other than what you're doing with your social media, how is this affecting your business? How is it affecting your day-to-day life now as opposed to before it hit?
Well, the interesting thing is I was actually at an Engage, and we were all there, and we all 300 people were there, and we came back and we were all hit by this different life. There's all this theory and people speaking and everything about our wonderful businesses and how we can improve it. And you came back literally to no business.
Right.
Although a lot of the business was, people started moving their functions. So the events that I had for March now want to be in October. So you had to get a new contract for the venue, tell the caterer, tell the photographer, tell the video, tell the florist, check that all the people that they wanted who had deposits would still be available on one of the new days in the future. And I was doing that week in and week out and changing things. And it obviously wasn't the same as work, but it was still a lot of work. I think what we learned, sort of secretly, I think I really enjoy. There's a lot that I enjoyed about. It was the first time that I wasn't run off my feet. I actually felt much more creative and peaceful, having a little bit of this time, and it also put a lot of things into perspective. I think a lot of us became a little bit more old fashioned. So I tend to always have meetings at 6 o'clock at night, 3-4 days a week. And suddenly you can have dinner at the time where everyone has dinner, not at 10 to 9.
Right.
You're not grabbing a sandwich at 10 to 9. And suddenly I learned I could cook, but, I made soup and, all things that you actually didn't think was your right anymore because you're an event person and it's always about everybody else and it's never about you. So I think there's a lot that came out of that, just having this time to breathe. It's interesting how, in Australia, we're allowed to start having dinner parties, and it started off with 5 people and then 7 people. And how we've all, even though they increase it, we all want to go back to the 5 people dinner parties because it's so much easier having 5 people in your house than 24. You actually talk to the people that are at the table, and everything is much easier, And I think you learned that you don't need a whole clothes cupboard of 74 shirts or different things mattered. And I think I got a great home, and I don't know if I ever sat in the lounge. Do you know what I mean? Because
right, running around so much.
So I was sitting in the lounge, or I was lying on the patio, and I think there were things I started gurning the patios and everything, and gurning the garage and going. I think there's definitely different phases of COVID where you sort of think, what's going to happen to my life? So I might as well just clean everything up, and this, gurning the bins outside. And then you go through different phases. It was also interesting, my assistant not being on top of me and working from home, and you can still do things. And we'd never had the guts to do all those kind of things because you think, well, if it's not right next to me, it's not going to be efficient. But you can actually be just as efficient, not expecting her to drive an hour to come to the office. So I think there's been a lot of things that a lot of people have learned all over the world that you can change, and it may never go back to the old, the old normal way of going to the office and lunch break and however it goes,
Yeah, it's really interesting. Putting aside the stress, of this pandemic, there is so much coming out of it. And for me as well, I feel more, again, there's certain stresses in certain areas, but deep down, this slowdown has really felt like such an opportunity to refresh ourselves, in so many respects.
Well, I think it's so much like a different growth. It's such a time to be able to grow and explore things that you haven't had time for. In fact, Ed Lively, started doing a thing. Well, how would you set your dinner table if there was only 2 of you there? And it went right around, quite through the industry where everyone was setting up tables and doing stuff. And I decided I'd set the table, and I got photos of me and Mandela and everything. And I put the photo of him and me at the table, and I set the table for dinner. And then I suddenly realized that, he had been in prison for 27 years. I mean, we complaining like a few weeks ago. It was only 3 months of our lives.
Right.
It wasn't the Second World War. We weren't locked, hiding from whoever in houses, not being able to use the bathroom or go to a bathroom or shower or bath. And, we're sitting in our houses sort of, with Netflix, watching videos, on the phone. We're very connected. So there's a lot I think it's been a really interesting time. And I think we've all discovered a lot about ourselves and everyone else. I mean, I do think when I look at my friends in New York and they show me, that they're living on Fifth Avenue and there's literally no cars, I think that you realize there are parts that are different places I think could be a little bit more frightening. And, like I look at, my friends in London where there's no one in the street. Do you know what I mean? There literally wasn't, and in those massive cities, that's quite sort of surreal.
It's surreal. Yeah, it is surreal. Well, Philip, this has been such a pleasure. I've really enjoyed getting to know you more through this, and I thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad. It's great talking to you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Philip Carr. Be sure to check out his website at Philip Carr, and that's one L, Philip with one L, and then CARR, philipcarr.com.au. His social media handle for Instagram is Philip Carr Event, and for Facebook, it's Philip Carr and Associates. Don't worry, got all of this stuff, the website, the social media handles, all in the show notes at our website of theweddingbiz.com. And if you're new to the show, welcome. Would love for you to share this. If you've been listening to the show, would also love you all to share it. It's a great episode, and it helps people find us, obviously, when you share it, and also give a great review wherever you get your podcast from. And don't forget to listen to our follow-on segment with each interview that comes out every Wednesday called The Next Level, in which I have a guest co-host. And together we tease out some of the highlights of the interview in a way that helps give you tips and advice to raise your own business to the next level. And this week's guest, my guest co-host for The Next Level, talking about Philip, is really special. Out of Sydney, Australia, celebrity chef Michael Rantisi. Michael, I hope I'm saying your last name right. That's Michael Rantisi. And next week, got something really different for the Wedding Biz. I've got Zamir Kasim of Zamir Kasim Fine Jewelry. Zamir custom designs stunning diamond rings and more. He's got a really great story, so be sure to tune in on Monday. And we want to thank our sponsor for today's episode. It is Kushner Entertainment. For very high-touch music and entertainment, go to KushnerEntertainment.com. And we'll catch you next week on The Wedding Biz.